𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 and welcome to 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪𝓾𝓱𝓪. From this video, I will start explaining Class 12 Political Science. We have already completed the Class 11th and now we come to the Class 12th. Similar to Class 11th, we have two books for Class 12th Political Science. First is Politics in India Since Independence and second is Contemporary World Politics. And from this video, I will start the book 1, which is Politics in India Since Independence. Now in this book, we will study about post-independent India, which is a very important subject if you are preparing for some competitions in further upcoming times, such as UPSC Civil Service Examination. In that paper, you will find this subject, post-independent India, helpful in GS paper 1 and GS paper 2. So we can say that this subject, post-independent India, is very much important. In this book, we will study about what has happened to India, how the politics, the democracy of India has been shaped and has evolved after independence in the 70 plus years of time. What are the changes that have been made to the democracy of the country? That will be the major point of discussion in this book. The next book, which is Contemporary World Politics, basically we will study about the world scenario, the politics in the world scenario. For example, how has US emerged as a superpower in the world? That will be the point of discussion in book number 2. And in this book, we will study about Indian politics, how has it informed and what we see today as India, how has it informed after independence in 70 plus years of time. That we will study in this book. Another point is that this book is of course of political science, but it's closely linked with history as well. You will see some points of history in this book as well and some points of politics as well. This is closely related to history as well. And in this video, I will explain the first chapter of this book, which is Challenges of Nation Building. So, challenges of nation building. Now in this chapter, we will study that the independence of India came with many challenges. No doubt the independence of India was a moment of joy and celebration. It was a moment of happiness, a moment of tantamount celebration for a large number of people. But at the same time, there were many grave consequences that came with independence. There were many challenges that India had to face as a newly independent country. In this book, we will study 3 points. First is that the independence of the country came with partition that led to large-scale grave consequences. Second point of discussion will be the integration of princely state needed urgent resolution. Third point of discussion will be how the internal boundaries or how the states have been reorganized in the country. These 3 briefs will be discussed in this chapter. So without any further ado, let's get started with the first topic, which is challenges for the new nation. Now, on the midnight of 15th August, we got our independence. At that time, the Prime Minister of the country, the first Prime Minister of the free country, free India, Jawaharlal Nehru, gave his famous speech, Tryst with Destiny. Now, at that time, our country had 2 major goals on which almost every national leader agreed upon, on which almost everyone agreed upon. These 2 goals were, first was to establish democracy in the country. Second was to work for the welfare of the socially disadvantaged and the weaker sections of the society, the poor sections of the society. These 2 goals were the major goals after the independence of the country, and no doubt the Indian government wanted to work on it. But at the same time, there were many problems to achieve these goals. What were those challenges? We will study the 3 challenges in this chapter. The 3 challenges. The first challenge was that to create a country which accommodated the diversity of the country, at the same time created unity in the country. So to maintain the national unity and territorial integrity of the country. It means that that India is of continental size. Even at that time and even now, India is of continental size. There are a lot of diversities in the country based on religion, based on language, based on geography, based on many tastes. we can say that we can divide the people of India on many factors. So to create a country called India, we have to accommodate all the differences of the country. The existence of differences, the plurality of the country had to be accommodated, and that is why it was important to create a country which was based on the principle of unity in diversity. Second problem was that you have created a country, but what about democracy in the country? To govern that country, you need to establish democracy in the country. You have studied about the Indian Constitution. In the Indian Constitution, you have seen that we have given the fundamental rights. There are directive principles, state policy, right to equality is there, right to vote to every citizen is there, and India has adopted a parliamentary form of government with free and fair elections. Isn't it enough for democracy? Isn't a democratic constitution enough for a democratic country? No, it's not. You need to understand that a democratic constitution is necessary for a democratic country, but is not sufficient for a democratic country. For that, you need actual practices. Even though the Indian Constitution adopted all those policies of democracy, but what they enacted in practical situation, that was a major concern. Third problem was that now you have established democracy, but what about the weaker sections of the society? So the third problem was to work for the welfare of the people, for all the sections of the society equally. Even though there was right to equality to all the citizens, even in the directive principle state policy, one principle was the welfare of the people. But what about in the practical situation? That was a concern, because there were many socially disadvantaged groups at that time, be it the caste discrimination, be it the gender discrimination. There were many discriminations, there were many socially disadvantaged groups and the weaker sections of the society. So in this chapter, we will study the first challenge. We will understand the first challenge, which was to create a country based on unity in diversity. The next two challenges will be discussed in chapter 2nd and chapter 3rd of this book, which will be era of one party dominance and the planned development, the era of planned development. So these two challenges, the next two challenges will be discussed in the next two chapters, and in this chapter we will study the first challenge. Now the next topic here is partition, displacement and rehabilitation. Partition, displacement and rehabilitation. As we already know that on the night of 14th and 15th August, not one but two countries got independence, that were India and Pakistan. The earlier British India got divided into two countries. First was India and second one was Pakistan. It was due to the two-nation theory that was proposed by the Muslim League, that proposed the idea that in India there were not one but two people, Hindus and Muslims, and that is why they demanded for a separate nation for Muslims, which was known as Pakistan. Of course, the national leaders at that time, especially the leaders of the Indian National Congress, opposed the idea of two-nation theory and a separate nation for the Muslims, but eventually the political developments in the 1940s and the competition, the controversies between the Congress and the Muslim League and the role of the Britishers led to the creation of Pakistan. So we can say that we got our independence with a very tragic partition of the country into two nations. And you need to see that the two-nation theory that was proposed by the Muslim League, earlier it was just in theory, but after that it was used as a theory for the creation of Pakistan by leaders such as Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So we can say that a major role in the partition of the country was the role of two-nation theory as well. Now, was the partition really easy? Let's see the process of partition as well. So process of partition. Now, it was really hard to demarcate boundaries of the country because we had no idea how would we create two countries from one country. There needed to be some boundaries, some creation of boundaries, so that there would be separate demarcation of territories on both sides of the country. and for that purpose the idea of religious majority was adopted. Now the idea of religious majority basically meant that those areas, those territories which had majority of Muslims would be included as territory of Pakistan, and the rest area where there were minority or literally no Muslims would be included in India as a part of territory of India. So we could say that for partition we had adopted the policy of religious majority, but even then there were problems in religious majority. There were basically 4 problems in the process of partition. First was that there was no single belt of Muslim majority in the country. There were 2 belts of Muslim majority and which were far away from each other. First was a belt in the Punjab region in the northwestern part of the country, and second was a part of Bengal. In that region also there was a large population of Muslims. So how would the country be created? Because between these 2 territories there was a large mass of India, and literally they would be too far away from each other, but still they had to form a country. And that is why if you look at the earlier maps of the world, earlier maps of India and Pakistan, you would see that there were 2 territories of Pakistan. First was the West Pakistan that we see today, and second was the East Pakistan that later got converted into another country, Bangladesh. So we could say that due to not having a single majority belt of Muslims, we had to create 2 territories that were so apart from each other as territories of Pakistan, West Pakistan and East Pakistan. The second problem in the partition of the country was that not all the Muslim majority areas wanted to be part of Pakistan. Leaders such as Khan 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪, who was a Gandhian follower and the leader of Northwestern Frontier Province (NWFP), did not want to be part of Pakistan. He wanted to be part of India. Eventually, Khan 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪's opinion was ignored and Northwestern Frontier Province was included in Pakistan. Still, we can say that there were many leaders, or there were some areas where Muslims were in majority, yet they did not want to be part of Pakistan. They were in favor of India. Third problem was that the countries were created, but what about the non-Muslim population in those territories that made the part of Pakistan? 2 areas, Punjab and Bengal, which made up the territory of Pakistan, had large number of non-Muslims population as well. There were many districts, or even at lower level, that they had majority of non-Muslim population as well. Eventually these 2 states had to be bifurcated. So if you look at the map of India and Pakistan, you would see that some part of Punjab is in India and some part of Punjab is in Pakistan. It's due to the population of the people. The non-Muslims, that is Hindus and Sikhs, were included in Indian territories, and the Muslim population was given to the Pakistan territories. Similarly, Bengal had been bifurcated as well. You see that West Bengal is in the location of eastern part of the country, yet we call it West Bengal because at that time the large state of Bengal had been bifurcated into 2 states. One went to the Pakistan, that is now Bangladesh, and another, the western part of that Bengal, made up the territory of India. And because it was the western part of the earlier Bengal, it's called West Bengal, even though it's in the eastern part of the country. So we can say that the non-Muslim population had to be included in India. That was the third problem. Fourth problem was the conception of minorities. Now suppose you had been living in a particular area and you now get to know that you are not a part of that country because of your religion or because of the demarcation of the boundaries. So many people who had been living for years in a place now became strangers to that same place because of the partition of the country, and thus they became easy targets for attacks. There were many communal riots. There were so much violence in the country due to partition, and these minorities, suppose lakhs of Hindus and Sikhs in the Pakistani territories and lakhs of Muslims in Indian territories, they became minorities and became easy target for attacks. Now initially the political leaders of the country thought that over time it would not be on large scale violence. The violence would be ignored, or the violence would vanish over time in a very small amount of time. They did not expect such a large scale violence, and they had no planning for tackling that violence as well. That is why there were many grave consequences of the partition. So what were those consequences of partition? Let's discuss them as well. So consequences of partition. Now as we know that with partition, a large scale unprecedented violence and trauma took place in the country. The killings and atrocities happened on both sides of the border. According to estimates, at that time around 80 lakh people were forced to move on the borders, and around 5 to 10 lakhs of people had been killed in this journey. Now these are the estimated figures. The real figures could be much higher than these. The partition of the country has been termed as the most abrupt, largest, unplanned, tragic transfer of the population. Why? Because you see that the transfer of the population had not at all been planned. People even at the time of independence did not know that whether they would be in India or Pakistan, because the demarcation of the boundaries for India and Pakistan had not taken place. The bifurcation of states such as Bengal and Punjab had not taken place till the time of independence, and that is why people did not know whether they were in India or Pakistan at the time of independence, and often they had to leave their homes at hours of notice, otherwise they would become easy target for attacks. As we see that a lot of people, often by foot, moved on the border so that they would leave the country and go to the country where they were assigned, and like if they were Muslims and that part became a part of Pakistan, or if that part became a territory of India, so they had to move to Pakistan. Similarly, non-Muslims had to move from those territories that were inculcated in Pakistan to those territories of India. So we could say that the partition had a large impact on the killings. The partition led to very tragic, grave killings of the people. In cities like Amritsar, Kolkata and Lahore, where there were clear demarcation of the boundaries between India and Pakistan, there formed some communal zones. Some areas where Hindus and Sikhs lived, and some areas where there were Muslims. Muslims often stayed away from those areas where Hindus and Sikhs lived. Similarly, the non-Muslims stayed from the areas of Muslims. So we could say that the area of communal zones started to be formed in cities where partition took place. No doubt those states which had less impact of partition, such as those states where literally there were no Muslim population, or those states in the middle of the country, they had a very less impact of the partition. But the states that were on the border of the India and Pakistan, they were very much impacted by the partition. We can say that one of the grave vulnerable sections of the society have been women, and that is why they had been met with tragic ends as well. Many women were abducted and were forced to convert into religion of the abductor. Often they were raped, attacked or killed. At the same time, their families also started to kill them to preserve the family honor. The concept, as you know, that at that time people were narrow-minded. They were not as much open-minded as people are today, and women at that time were not empowered compared to today, and that is why people started to kill the women of their own family so that they would not be abducted, they would not be killed, or they would not be forced to marry the abductor, and the honor of the family would be preserved. Similarly, children had been affected. Many children had been separated from their parents. If you see the movie Bhag 𝓒𝓱𝓪𝓾𝓱𝓪. In that movie as well, you will see the grave consequences of partition as well. So we can say that there were many grave consequences of the partition. There were large number of killings that are unknown to today as well. Many people had been separated. Many people who were crossing the borders had been killed in the journey. At the same time, the partition was called the division of hearts. Those communities that hitherto lived together now started to kill each other. So of course it would be a division of hearts. People believed that it was not a division of the country, it was a division of everything. The ideas, the sentiments of the people, the emotions of the people had been divided as well. And that is why many filmmakers, poets, and many writers started to write novels, to create poems, to create movies, to display the situation of the partition. If you look at the movies of that time, you will see that a lot of movies, large number of movies are based on the consequences of partition, that were grave consequences. Another thing is that the country Pakistan was created from Muslim. Does that mean that India automatically became a Hindu country? That was a big question as well, because there were many communities, for example Muslim League in Pakistan, that demanded for the protection of Muslims in the colonial India. Similarly, there were many Hindu organizations as well that demanded India as a Hindu country, so that it would not be a secular country. So we can say that it was also a big question whether India would be secular or a Hindu country, because at the time of partition, even after the partition, around 12% of the Indian population was Muslim, because Pakistan had declared itself as an Islam country, but India had not. India had accommodated all religions equally. The leaders of the national movement have always been opposing to the idea of two-nation theory, and that is why they adopted secularism in the country, so that all the religious minorities, not just Muslims but other religious minorities such as Buddhists, Jains, all these religious minorities would be accommodated equally, so that India would be a secular country. And that is why the principle of secularism has been enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Another thing about partition is Mahatma Gandhi's sacrifice. Now, if you know even a little background of the partition of the country, then you must know the fact that Mahatma Gandhi had always been opposing to the idea of separation of the country. He always believed that India should be united, that people should be united, and that is why he was saddened by the communal riots, by the violence that took after independence due to the partition. He was disheartened by the fact that those ideas which he had lived and worked for his whole life, such as ahimsa and satyagraha, because Mahatma Gandhi had always been a believer of non-violence, and that is why the violence after partition disheartened him. At the time of independence, on 15th August 1947, he did not take part in any of the celebrations of independence. Instead, he went to Kolkata, where communal riots took place at a very large amount. There he saw the gruesome killings, the ruthless killings of the people based on the religion, and that is why he wanted to stop that violence. Now, the arrival of Mahatma Gandhi at some point of time reduced the killings of the people at a very large amount, and you see that at the time of independence, these communities with communal harmony even celebrated the Independence Day of the country. But after some time, the communal riots again started to take place, and at that time Mahatma Gandhi had been erupted and had to do fast. Next month he went to Delhi because he was concerned about Muslims, as they should be equal citizens in the country, because in Pakistan there was not equality. So what if India adopted the same policy? He was concerned about that fact, and that is why he wanted Muslims who separated from Pakistan, who still lived in India, as equal citizens, so that they should not be discriminated in the country. And that is why in Delhi he took his last fast. And you see that on 30th January 1948 he was killed by an extremist known as Nathuram Godse, because there were many extremists who were unhappy with the actions of Mahatma Gandhi, because at that time Mahatma Gandhi in his prayer meetings asked for equality between Hindus and Muslims in India. Another thing is that he demanded for the financial dues to the Pakistan as well. You know that in Kashmir, Pakistan had sent its troops to fight with Indian troops, and that is why the Indian government stopped giving its financial assistance to Pakistan, which it had committed earlier. Commitment of India had been stopped due to that incident, and that is why Mahatma Gandhi was keen with this, that the India should give the financial honor, the financial assistance to Pakistan, which it had promised earlier. Now these are some of the actions that made unhappy the extremists believed that Mahatma Gandhi was responsible for their conditions, and that is why on 30 January 1948 he was killed by Nathuram Godse. He fired 3 bullets and Mahatma Gandhi died instantly. So we can say that due to the killing, due to the death of such a very prominent, a very famous, a very popular leader of the national movement, who had played a very big role, a crucial role in the independence of the country, that led to grief in the whole country. The whole country was in silence. The whole country was disheartened by the death of Mahatma Gandhi, and that is how we saw the end of such a long-lived, non-violent leader of the country. Now another problem with the independence of the country was the integration of princely states. Now in British India, the India that was ruled by the British government, at that time there were 2 kinds of territories. First was the British provinces, British Indian provinces. Second were the Indian princely states. Now provinces were directly under the control of the British government, and these princely states were in the control of Indian princes, and they had at some limited autonomy, but they were in the supremacy of the British government. So we can say that the princely states were not under the direct control of the British government. Instead, they placed their supremacy on these princely states, and this thing is known as paramountcy or suzerainty of the British government. Now at the time of independence, what British India did was that it gave the Indian rulers, the Indian princely states ruler, the power, its own decision to join the dominion of India, the dominion of Pakistan, or to remain independent, and that led to some problems. So what was the problem? Now you see that in India at the time of independence there were around 565 princely states in the country. So to integrate all of them was a big task, because they became legally independent. They had the right to choose to be a part of India, to be a part of Pakistan, or to remain as independent, because the British government after independence discarded the idea of paramountcy or suzerainty. So there was no paramountcy. After the breaking of paramountcy, all the princely states of the country became legally independent. So of course there would be a problem arising that how all these 500 plus princely states would be integrated in India. Secondly, there were many princely states that came up and started to say that they wanted to be independent or to be part of Pakistan. For example, the Nizam of Travancore, the Nizam of Hyderabad, both the Nizams of these 2 states wanted to remain independent. There were many other princely states that wanted to remain independent as well. So how did the government of India deal with these challenges? Let's discuss that as well. So the government's approach. Now the Indian government had always taken a very firm stance against the integration of the princely states in the country, because the main focus was the territorial integrity of the country. Opposing to this was the Indian Muslim League. The Muslim League wanted all the princely states to be free to choose India or Pakistan, but the Indian government wanted the princely states to be part of India. So we can say that there were oppositions between, there were many controversies between the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. Taking the integration of the princely state, there were three considerations by the Indian government. First was that the people of most of the princely states wanted to be part of India because India supposedly gave more rights than Pakistan. Pakistan itself declared itself a country for Islamic country. So of course, large part of the population of India wanted to be part of India. Next part was that you see that all the people wanted to be part of India. Another thing was that against the backdrop of partition of the country, the Indian leaders took a very stern firm against the integration of the princely state. They wanted territorial integrity of the country. Third was that even if they merged all the princely states in the country, they gave flexibility to accommodate the plurality of all the states, princely states of the country. So taking these three considerations, the integration of the princely states was done, and a very prominent leader, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who was the Deputy Prime Minister of the country and the Home Minister of the country at the time of independence, was a very prominent leader, played a very crucial role in negotiating with all the princely states to be integrated in India diplomatically, at the same time being firm with all the princely states. So why do we call him the Iron Man of India? Because he was a strong man who binded all the states, princely states in the country. So for the integration of princely states, we give a very big credit to Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Another fact was that instrument of accession was made. All the princely states that wanted to be part of India had to sign the instrument of accession. After they joined instrument of accession, they were considered a territory of India who would be under the control of the Indian government, at the same time would be given some part of autonomy. So all the princely states now had to become constitutional monarchy. Another thing was that after independence, in the integration of state, another problem that rose was that the British government gave right to the princely states ruler to decide whether it wanted to be part of India, Pakistan, or to remain independent. So if there was a princely state where people wanted to be part of India, but the ruler was against that, then what would happen? That joining that princely state would be a very problematic task. So there were mainly 4 princely states that were hard to be integrated, that had a very big issue over integrating in India. These 4 were Junagadh in Rajasthan, in present day Rajasthan. Second was Jammu and Kashmir. Third was Hyderabad, and fourth was Manipur. Now in Junagadh, a plebiscite was done where all the people had taken a part in that plebiscite and decided to join in India. In this chapter, we will study about Hyderabad and Manipur, because about Jammu and Kashmir we will study in chapter 8 of this book. So let's discuss about these 2 princely states as well. First is Hyderabad. So Hyderabad, now at that time, at the time of independence, Hyderabad was the largest princely state of the country. It included the parts of Karnataka, parts of present day Andhra Pradesh as well. So considerably it was the largest princely state. It was different from the present day Hyderabad. Another thing was that the ruler of Hyderabad, who was known as Nizam, was one of the world's richest men. So of course India wanted Hyderabad to be part of India, and even if you look geographically, the situation of Hyderabad, the position of Hyderabad is in the middle of the country. So of course it could not be an independent country, because just think about it, it would be surrounded by India from the 4 sides, and that is why India thought that it should be part of India. But the Nizam of Hyderabad announced that Hyderabad would remain independent, and that is why it signed an agreement with India known as Standstill Agreement on November 1947. In November 1947, the Standstill Agreement was signed between Indian government and the Nizam of Hyderabad. According to the Standstill Agreement, the Nizam of Hyderabad was on a standstill stance. That means he did not declare the princely state as an independent country immediately, but was on a firm stance that it should remain, it would think over so. So for a year, the agreement was signed between the Indian government and the Nizam of the Hyderabad. At the same time, the condition over the situation in the state of Hyderabad, in the princely state of Hyderabad, were in turmoil, because there were many movements against the oppressive force of Hyderabad Nizam. The Nizam of Hyderabad had many oppressive rules, many suppressive decisions against the peasants of Telangana, against the women who had suffered a lot of brutality from the Nizam of the Hyderabad. And that is why, with the help of communists and the Hyderabadi Congress on the forefront, the movements took place against the Nizam of Hyderabad. Now, if you look diplomatically, politically, you would see that the population of Hyderabad had a large contribution of Hindus, and the Nizam was Muslim. So what would happen was that, of course, if there were lot of Hindus population, they wanted to be part of India, but the Nizam was against it, and that also became a reason for the movements of people against the Nizam. At the same time, Nizam would also not sit down. He started another force known as Razakars on the people of the state. Now, these Razakars were clearly very ruthless in killing, in looting, in raping all the people. We can say that the ruthlessness of Razakars was on a very high level. They had done many atrocities in the princely state of Hyderabad, and that is why Indian government had to intervene in that matter. Indian government released its own troops, its own forces against Razakars, and forced the Nizam of Hyderabad to sign the instrument of accession. So we can say that the princely state of Hyderabad was included as a territory of India by using force, though after using force a plebiscite was done in Hyderabad as well, and as expected, as there were lots of Hindus, they wanted to be part of India. So we can say that Hyderabad was included in India by using force against the Razakars that were released by the Nizam of the Hyderabad. Another princely state which had an issue after joining India was Manipur. Now, just after independence, the king of Manipur, at that time Bodh Chandra Singh, signed the instrument of accession, but he wanted a large amount of autonomy. So he signed the instrument of accession, but at the same time had a lot of autonomy compared to other states, and became the first state in the free India to hold election by using the principle of universal adult franchisee. So the Manipur became a constitutional monarchy. It was due to the pressure of the people on the king. So he had to elect a legislative assembly. He had to hold elections for electing the legislative assembly members, and that is why in 1948 the first ever elections by using the principle of universal adult franchisee took place in the country. Now, after the formation of legislative assembly, the members of Congress of the Manipur wanted Manipur to be merged completely with India, to sign the merger agreement with India, but the members of opposing teams, of the opposing political parties, were against this idea, and that is why what happened, that the Indian government forced the king of Manipur, you can say that without taking the opinion of the legislative assembly of Manipur, forced the king of Manipur to sign the instrument of accession, and that is why the legislative assembly members were not at all happy with how their opinions were ignored and how they had not been informed about the merger agreement between the Indian government and the king of Manipur. And that is why still today we see that there are some movements in Manipur against this particular idea. So we can say that the accession, the integration of Hyderabad and Manipur was a problematic task. Now we have seen that partition had been done. After partition, we saw that a grave consequence could be that India could be divided into many smaller countries if all the princely states wanted to remain independent. So integration of princely state needed urgent resolution. Third was that how for administrative purpose the Indian internal boundaries would be demarcated. So let us talk about the reorganization of states as well. Next topic, reorganization of states. So reorganization of states. Now after independence, after partition, after the integration of princely states, how did the Indian government demarcate the internal boundaries, create the internal boundaries of the states? Now if we look at the time of colonial era, the British government simply demarcated the boundaries of the states, the internal boundaries of the states on the basis of administrative convenience, or they simply coincided with the territories annexed by the British government. Now the leaders of national movement were against this idea, rejected this proposal, rejected this way of creating the internal boundaries, as they considered it artificial, and that is why they adopted language as a basis for creating states. Now when we say language as basis, we mean linguistic states. So linguistic state means that the state is created on the basis of language. In fact, in the Nagpur session of Indian National Congress, it adopted language as a basis for the division of Indian National Congress as well. So that is why there were many provincial congresses based on the language spoken by the members of that particular provincial congress. So we can say that language as a basis had been adopted. However, things changed after independence, because due to partition, now the leaders felt that if we divide the country, create the internal boundaries based on language, then what would happen? There would be clear separation of people, there may be separatism, and there may be another partition based on language. So that is why after independence, the leaders, you could say that the government of India postponed the matter of creating internal boundaries of the state, because the memory of partition was still fresh. Second point was that they postponed the creation of internal boundaries based on language due to the fact that they thought there were many other social and economic challenges that they had to face, that they should work upon. So the creation of internal boundaries was postponed. However, the postponement of the internal boundaries led to many protests in the country, and the first ever state to be created on a linguistic basis became Andhra Pradesh. How did it become the first state to be created on linguistic state? Now there are many local leaders. There was a Madras province in the country which included some parts of Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and many other Kerala, many parts of the present day other states, and that is why there were many languages spoken in that particular Madras province. And there a movement known as Vishal Andhra movement started taking place. Now this Vishal Andhra movement wanted a separate nation for the Telugu speaking people known as Andhra state. And the leader of that particular movement was a Congress leader and a veteran Gandhi known as Putti Sriramulu. Now this leader, after seeing that there was a post-movement, took a very long fast of 56 days, which ultimately led to his death. Now his death led to a large-scale unrest in the country, and finally the government of India had been pressurized and had to create a new state from Madras province known as Andhra state, which was for the Telugu speaking people in 1952. So we can say that the first ever linguistic state to be created in the country was Andhra Pradesh, which was created in 1952. Now after this, many other movements started taking place, that they wanted many other states to be created in the country, and that is why many movements started taking place. And finally the government of India had to establish a commission known as State Reorganization Commission in 1953. The purpose of State Reorganization Commission was to find out what should be the basis for reorganizing the states of the country to create the internal boundaries of the country. And when the commission gave its report, it declared that in the report it stated that the boundaries of the state should be created on the basis of language, and that is why the creation of linguistic states started to happen. There were many states now that were created on the basis of language. Finally, the State Reorganization Act was passed in 1956, which led to the creation of 14 states and 6 union territories in the country. So we can say that language became very important as a basis for the creation of state, the creation of linguistic state. Though the leaders at that time had fear for the creation of linguistic state that may lead in the future the separatism of the country or the division in the country. That is why many leaders opposed the idea of creation of linguistic states as well. Though later on we saw that not only it prevented separatism but also led to unity and diversity. It reflected the idea of plurality in the country. Secondly, it established a part of democracy in the country as well. What does democracy mean in our country? In the context of India, democracy doesn't always mean that the right to vote or the free and fair elections in the country or the democratic constitution, but it also means that how we have accommodated all the existence of differences in the country, which can be in opposition, which may be controversial, which may be opposing to each other, but still we have accommodated them and lived as unity and diversity. That is the soul of the democracy in the country, and that is why we see the creation of linguistic state not as a negative thing but as a positive thing, which has led to strengthening of the national unity and territorial integrity in the country. Now the last topic of this chapter is fast forward creation of new states. Now, not all the linguistic states in the country were created immediately after the passing of Reorganization Commission. There were many states that took many years for the creation. A similar experiment was done in Bombay, a bilingual state where there were 2 speaking communities, Marathi speaking communities and Gujarati speaking communities, that were separated in 1960. So we can say that there were many states that were created not immediately after the State Reorganization Act. If you look in the northeastern part of the country, Meghalaya was carved out from Assam in 1972. In the same year, Tripura and Manipur emerged as separate states as well. In 1987, Mizoram became an independent state in the country. Another thing, Nagaland in northeast, however, got separated, got as an internal state much earlier than all those other northeastern states in 1960s. So we can say that many states were created after a long struggle or after a long period of time as well. If we look at the case of Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand and Uttarakhand, these states were not created on the basis of language. Instead, they were created on the basis of regional cultural development, because these states were not satisfied with their cultural development. That is why they demanded for separate states. The creation of Haryana from Punjab state, that was earlier a very large province, so the Haryana, which included the Hindi speaking people, and Himachal Pradesh, which also included the Hindi speaking people, were separated from Punjab. So we can say that a lot of many states in the country were created on the basis of language, but it was not the sole reason for the creation of the states in the country. And the creation of linguistic states still continue to be. In 2014, for example, the state of Telangana was separated from Andhra Pradesh for the Telugu speaking people specifically. So we can say that states still continue to be created. There are still movements going on in the country. If we look at the demand of Vidarbha in Maharashtra, for the demand of Harit Pradesh in western part of Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal. So there are still many movements going on in the country for the creation of new states, and that is all we have seen in this chapter. In this chapter, with this we see that how just after independence the partition has impacted the lives of the people, how India emerged as an independent nation, and the immediate challenge, the first challenge was to create a country where the diversity would be reflected but there would be national unity and territorial integrity in the country. How the challenge of national unity and territorial integrity in the country was tackled upon. That is what we have discussed in this chapter. We have studied about the partition. The three major points have been discussed in this chapter. First was the partition, the consequences, the process of partition. Second was the creation, the integration of princely states, how we have included all the states that should have been in India. Third was the reorganization of states. We have included the princely state, but what about the internal boundaries? These 3 points we have discussed in this chapter. And now the next 2 challenges that we saw earlier in the chapter. Second challenge, that was to seek democracy in the country, to establish democracy in the country. And third challenge, to work for the welfare of all the people, the socially disadvantaged groups and the poor section of the society, will be in the second and third chapter of this book. So I have covered all the topics and subtopics of this chapter. And the next chapters of this book will be covered in the further upcoming videos. So stay tuned for the upcoming videos. Thank you very much.